Good evening. My name is Jose Ariano, and it is my privilege to welcome you tonight to an evening with Pema Chödrön and Great Boyle on Cultivating Courage. I grew up in a community plagued by poverty, in a house filled with generational gang involvement and drug abuse. I was a hopeful child who eventually lost all hope. I got jumped into a gang at 12 years old, was arrested for the first time at 15, and was in and out of prison all my life. I spent over a decade incarcerated in the California prison system. The pain from childhood and my trauma from life's experiences kept me in a hopeless state until I came to find this place called Homeboy Industries. There, I began to realize I was worthy of love. I am living proof that cultivating love, compassion, and kinship in a community where I can fully be myself leads to healing. Here's how this evening will work. With the help of some of my co-workers at Homeboy Industries, we will invite our two speakers. Well, they're already out here. Our two speakers are here. We will invite our two speakers to speak one at a time, and then I will have the honor of moderating a conversation between them. We will finish, all right. We will finish the evening with questions from you, the audience. We are grateful to Sounds True and the staff at Royce Hall and Homeboy Industries for pulling all this together. And we are especially grateful for Pema Chödrön, whose idea it was to have this evening and designate all the proceeds to benefit the sacred mission and vision of Homeboy Industries. Thank you so much. Please be so kind as to silence ourselves and ourselves. It is now my pleasure to bring up here one of our senior navigators, Lamai Glenn.
Good evening, beautiful people. Before arriving to Homeboy Industries, I was a young man recently released from prison, with nearly a decade of my life behind me, eager to move forward with my life and pick up the pieces of a life that had been left in disarray for so many years. A man with a past, but more remarkable, a man that exuded the strength to change. I wasn't sure what I would find at Homeboys, but I was resolute in believing that it was definitely worth taking a chance. So at Homeboy Industries, not only have I found the opportunity to change my life for the better, but I've also found a home. Pema Chödrön is an American-born Buddhist nun and mother, currently teaching in the United States and in Canada. She is the author of numerous books and has inspired millions from around the world who have been touched by an example and message of practicing peace in these turbulent times. She has helped countless people awaken wisdom and compassion in themselves and has guided us to a kind, tender heart within, capable of transforming our world. It is my pleasure and distinct privilege to introduce to you Pema Chödrön.
Oh, wait, is he still?
You want to start? Yeah.
I thought you had a still. Thank you very much. I was going to stand behind this podium, but I realized you wouldn't be able to see me if I did. I don't know if any of you have ever been up on a stage like this, but we are well lit up here, if you'll excuse the expression. But those of us who are up here see nothing. Total blackness with a little red and green lights that are flickering up there. So it's like talking into outer space. In a way, the reason I'm standing here tonight, it's as he was saying, because I wanted to see if in some little way we could help Homeboy Industries. And I came to know of Father Gregory's work and Homeboy Industries because someone gave me the book, his first book, Tattoos on the Heart, which is a wonderful book, a very touching book. It's the kind of book that sometimes you cry because the stories are so deeply moving, and sometimes you just laugh out loud because Father Gregory has a very, very good sense of humor. Now, I was raised Catholic, so I have trouble saying anything but Father Gregory, but he has asked that I call him Greg, so I'm going to try. But I was thinking, really, the real reason I'm here is because I wanted to be able to say a few words to him, just have a conversation, and this was the only way we could do it. We had to get 1,000 people together to watch us so I could, touch his hand, say hello, give him a hug, and hear a few words from him, Plus meet and spend some time with good young men and women from Homeboy Industries. So I think it was about 3 years ago, Father Gregory, when I read Tattoos on the Heart, he mentioned me in there. So I thought, maybe I had a chance, So we contacted Homeboy Industries and said, was it possible for me to meet with him? So I got there, and we walked into Homeboy Industries, and there were all these chairs, like about 25 chairs or so, sitting all facing forward for what I assumed was some event that was about to happen. And we walked through the Homegirl Cafe, Homegirl, and then here were all these chairs, and we were told to wait, and we were going to get a tour. So there was a seat, so I sat down in one of the chairs, and I said to a woman who was sitting next to me, I said, what's the event? Like what's about to happen here? She said, the event is Greg, Father Greg. The event is that we're all waiting to see him. All these 25 people waiting just to see him, and somehow he was also going to fit me in. So I found that really touching, and so we had our tour, and then sure enough, he did fit me in. And so here I am tonight. This is the next step in the journey, and I hope that this journey continues for the two of us after this. So the only thing I wanted to say, actually, I actually want to do just kind of propaganda for Homeboy Industries. I don't have any other real purpose this evening except to do that. But and hoping some of you who hadn't heard of Homeboy, sounds like quite a few of you may have heard of it before from all the cheers and everything, but that some of you who hadn't will be connected now with Homeboy Industries and with the wonderful work that's done there, and be moved to visit and to help in any way you can. So, there's I guess you could say like an idea or an ideal, maybe an ideal. In the Buddhist teachings, it's called the Bodhisattva. And the Bodhisattva is a person who devotes their whole life, their purpose in life is to alleviate suffering. And to just try to soothe the sorrows of the world. And that's what the main thing that they want to do. And even though I'm sure that Greg does not like to be called a bodhisattva or anything like that, nevertheless, in my book, that's what he is. Because the people that are willing to just put themselves out there and literally put their whole life, that their whole life is benefiting other people and helping other people and trying to soothe the sorrows of the world, in my book, that's a modern day bodhisattva. And so it's said that the bodhisattva has a lot of compassion and tries to alleviate suffering. And alleviate suffering at the outer level, and that means hunger and thirst, no place to live, not be able to get a job. The outer level also means violence, neglect, all the circumstances of a life, the outer circumstances of a life that causes you to suffer greatly. And the Bodhisattva wants to alleviate that suffering at the outer level. And my feeling is that Homeboy does that. And the main way that they do that is by providing jobs. And I think that's the main mandate of Homeboy Industry, is to provide employment. Would you say that's true?
Sure.
Yeah. So the motive is, I have to keep checking with him because, I could be getting it wrong. I could be up here talking to you and he's back there going.
No.
So one of the mottos is jobs, not jail, or nothing stops a bullet like a job. And so if you can provide employment, and hopefully it will come out more tonight about how that's actually done and things like that. But I know that one way is that Homeboy Industries is a whole lot of businesses which give employment to the young men and women who are needing it. And this is a population of young people who don't get a chance. If you've been incarcerated, you can't get a job. You hear about this again and again. Someone is even hired for the job, but then when the references come in after they have the job and they see that they've been incarcerated, they're asked to leave. So places that can employ, so a place like Homeboy Industries, where you are given a job if you're willing to go to the job and keep the hours and do it. There's a lot of things like tattoo removal, for instance, and silk screening, and there's the cafe and the bakery and various other industries that they have that provide jobs. But if my understanding is right, also, Greg has found a lot of people all over the Los Angeles area who are willing to employ ex-gang members and people who have been incarcerated, but not pay the salaries until they prove themselves that they'll work hard and do well in the job. Is that right?
Sure, why not?
Sure,
Yeah,
why
sure.
not?
Yeah.
Something close to that? Something close to
You're
that.
on a roll.
Yeah, well, close to that. So, a lot of the fundraising that has to be done is to provide, because then what Homeboy does is they pay the salaries for a while. Yes, all right, something like that. I knew I shouldn't have too many facts. That was always a bad idea. But I feel like the outer causes of suffering are addressed greatly if someone can turn their life around by being able to take care of themselves, to earn a salary and turn their lives around in that way. Then they say also that the Bodhisattvas are interested in alleviating suffering at an inner level. And the inner level is the suffering that comes from not being loved, the suffering that comes from feeling that you really are not okay, that nobody could love you, that you're not lovable, the kind of suffering that comes from feeling lesser, feeling that there's something fundamentally wrong with you, fundamentally that there's something lacking in you. And this kind of suffering is very all-pervasive. It's so many of us feel this kind of suffering of not being okay in our core of our being, somehow feeling that we're not okay. And Homeboy also addresses this, and in my opinion, this is addressed, and it's hard to say what's more important, outer, inner, but inner is addressed by having such a loving community. So many of the stories in Greg's first book, Tattoos on the Heart, and then his recent book, Barking to the Choir, are stories about people who have never felt loved in their lives feeling loved, people who have never felt that they were worth anything feeling that they are worth something. And that kind of suffering is, the healing of that kind of suffering, boy, I mean, I've heard again and again that how we regard ourselves adds up to the kind of world we live in. And Homeboy, with the people that are fortunate enough to come there, they have this loving, loving community. One of my actual favorite stories, and I hope I get this one right, is that Greg tells, is that he was talking with a young woman, and he described that anything horrible that could ever happen to a person had happened to this young woman. And the two of them were talking in his office. She was probably one of those 25 that came in. And she said to him, "I wish that you were God." And he said, "Why do you wish that I was God?" And she said, "Because if you were God, you would let me into heaven." Yeah, so that's the kind of love I'm talking about. So, not Greg himself, and then the whole atmosphere there, feeling that accepted, you know. There's a third level of suffering, which is sometimes called the most profound one of all. Hard to say which is the most profound of all of these, and that is the suffering that comes from what I would call a closed mind, a prejudiced mind, biased mind, and a hard heart. The suffering that comes from being able to feel that some people are important and other people just don't count. That kind of closed-mindedness is a very, very deep kind of suffering. That kind of closed-mindedness that you can say that this group is okay and that group is not okay. The kind of mind that prejudges people and classifies people even before you know anything about them. And the hard-heartedness where you can turn against people. And this is actually kind of getting a lot of press right now at the borders, you know. Again, I don't want to get into too many details or politics or anything, but that kind of hard-heartedness, closed-mindedness. And I don't know if it's fair to say indifference to suffering, but not being able to have an empathetic feeling, a feeling of kinship with people whose lives are so desperate that they're fleeing, trying to get into the United States for a better life and a safer life. And the way in which Homeboy addresses that is very interesting, because one of the ways that it's addressed is having people that were formerly enemies, like two members of rival gangs who were happy to shoot each other, they really hate each other. Hatred would not be too light a word, probably. And them working together side by side. And what Greg always says in the stories is that initially they'll work together, but they won't talk to each other because the animosity is really strong. On the other hand, they're glad to be where they are, but they wish they could be there without this other guy there. And so he tells this story, I just saw it on a little YouTube clip, of two guys are working in the bakery making, of all things, croissant. And one of them has a tattoo on his face which is antagonistic to the rival gang. So that means antagonistic to his coworker. And so they're working there together, and they never talk, but they're working side by side. And it goes on for quite a while of them just working together, not talking. And then one day, the guy with the tattoo comes in and just says to the other guy, I got this removed, or I'm getting this removed. And that was, you know, they still hadn't talked or anything, but something had shifted in their hearts. So if you can create situations where something shifts in a hard heart, where something softens up in a hard heart, or something opens up in a closed mind, that's not easy to do. That is not easy to do. If a lot of people knew how to do that, can you imagine what this world would be like? What a great place it would be. That would be peace on earth, you know. So it's done by having people who were formerly enemies working side by side, and when you get to know each other, that begins to cut through the closed-mindedness and the hard-heartedness. So I'm very, very impressed with the Bodhisattva activity of Gregory Boyle, and I am very, and you notice I didn't say father, and
Progress.
I am very impressed with the Bodhisattva activity of Homeboy Industries, a whole group of people, a whole community of people who are committed to alleviating suffering and the causes of suffering, the outer causes, the inner causes of lack of being loved or cared for, and these most profound causes of a closed mind and a hard heart. So I think that's all I really wanted to say, except 3 cheers for Homeboy Industries.
Thank you.
Can you set all the facts straight now?
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Good evening. My name is Guadalupe Garnica.
I first heard G, or Father Greg, on the radio. I was 17 and locked up in the youth authority. It wasn't until I was 21, I literally ran into Homeboy. I had crazy hair, out of breath, one shoe on, and a bit out of control. Maybe more than a bit. I spent more than 6 years in prison, and at Homeboy Industries, I've realized that there's a lot of us in the same boat, and we're just trying to stay afloat. G constantly holds us and roots for us, no matter what. He is the father many of us never had. There's no place like Homeboy. I don't know where I would be without it. Now, I get to introduce the man who started this place, the person whose no matter whatness really matters. I am proud to be part of this movement of radical kinship, where we belong to each other, and we keep together the boat afloat. I am proud to welcome here tonight, G, Father Greg Boyle.
Good. I love you more.
I'm sorry.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Lupe. She didn't mention that she was actually being chased by the police. I remember that distinctly. Hence the one shoe. Ani Pema, thank you for your friendship above everything, and thank you for your generosity in having this idea to have you all here, who I can't see even a single one. Thank you, Jose and Lamai and Lupe. The day won't ever come when I have more courage, or I am more noble, or I'm closer to God than the three of you. You know, I think Pema was expressing sort of a dream, you know, like what would it look like if we cultivated a community of kinship such that God, in fact, might recognize it, you know, where we would imagine a circle of compassion and we would imagine nobody standing outside that circle. And as we speak, Miguel Lugo and a whole bunch of people are down at the border wanting to dismantle the barriers that exclude by standing with our sisters and brothers. And it's about standing, it's about going out to the margins, because that's how the margins get erased, and you stand with the poor and the powerless and the voiceless, and you stand with the easily despised and the readily left out, and you stand with the demonized so that the demonizing will stop, because demonizing is always untruth, and you stand with the disposable so that the day will come when we stop throwing people away. And you imagine something different, as Pema, who's my teacher, has shown me for so many years, even before I ever met her. And so you go to the margins and you just hope against hope, and you look under your feet and the margins get erased because we're connected. And people will accuse Miguel Lugo, who was the head of our security and a homie who was locked up for 21 years and half of those years in solitary confinement. And he says, I'm going to go down there and I'm going to fast. And people will accuse you of wasting your time when you go to the margins. But the prophet Jeremiah writes, in this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing. So you're here tonight, I think, and thank you for supporting Homeboy Industries, and thank you for loving Pema. But you want those voices to be heard. I talk a little bit about God because I feel like it's an obligation for me to do this, and I also have the benefit of believing. And Meister Eckhart, who was a theologian and a mystic who died in 1328, said, "It is a lie, any talk of God that doesn't comfort you." So I buried my 92-year-old mother some months ago, and she was a character and had 8 kids and a slew of lots and lots of grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And she was sharp as a tack, even to the very end. And in the last year of her life, she watched so much MSNBC, she was becoming Rachel Maddow. But she wasn't even a lick afraid of dying. And she would say things like, "I can't wait to go home." Once a month before she died, she was just exuberant and excited, and she said, "I've never done this before." Like it was skydiving. And in fact, her last words to me were the day before she died, and she was asleep, and she wakes up and she sees me sitting there, and she says, "Oh, for crying out loud." She was pissed she wasn't dead. But I say this because, in the last week or so of her life, it'd be around her bed, it'd be 2 or 3 or 4 or 8 of us, her kids, and she'd be, in and out of consciousness, asleep, and then she'd wake up. As soon as she woke up, she'd lock onto one of us, and with breathless delight, she'd say, "Oh, you're here. You're here." And when she died, and I was there when she died, just the 2 of us, and she let out this tiny, glorious, wondrous gasp, and then she left us skydiving. And no one in earshot of the sound would ever be frightened of death again. You're here. I was thinking about kind of what Homeboy is, and there are a lot of mechanics to it, and thank you, Pema, for the commercial.
You're welcome.
But it's about healing. It's, I was thinking, there's a lot of Buddhist texts begin with these sweet words, "O nobly born, remember who you really are." And I think that's kind of that's what happens at Homeboy. You remember who you really are. This morning I got a text, I don't even know if you know this, Dennis, one of our workers, texted me, and he said, "They may have to cut off half of my tongue," he said. So he was in a car accident, had gotten shot, and they missed, and it caused an accident. He bit into his tongue, and so gangrenous, and he says, "They can't save my tongue. It's not healing. They're going to have to cut it off." So I'm texting him, I said, "Dennis, my magnificent son." And then I wrote, "Oh, nobly born. Remember who you really are. You are this light and fountain of unconditional love. You are courage. You are dignified and noble. You are thoroughly and unshakably good. You are not your tongue." It is a lie, any talk of God that doesn't comfort you. The homies always help me kind of find things that rhyme with God. I was talking to a homie the other day who was telling me that when he was 9, he and his twin brother were forced to live with the grandmother. The home where he was taken from with his parents was violent and abusive and chaotic. And he said, my mother was the meanest human being I'd ever known. We lived for 1 year with her until they ran away. He works at Homeboy now. He's 37 years old and has three small daughters. And he says every day after school, she would make us strip to our underwear and we'd have to sit in the hallway and be still. And she would put duct tape over our mouths because she said, I hate the sound of your voices. Well, when he says this, he starts to choke up. And he can barely speak. And then he says, this is why I never shush my girls. I love the sound of their voices. In fact, the other day when the oldest one gets a crayon and she goes to the living room wall and she draws wildly, and my wife says, do something, tell her something. So I do. I go up to her and I put my arms around her, and the two of us, we stare at the wall. And I point at it and I say, that is the most magnificent work of art I've ever seen. And suddenly you have a sense of the kind of God you have. The one who loves the sound of your voice and thinks you are a magnificent work of art. You're here. We receive the tender glance of God, and then we're compelled to be the tender glance in the world. You breathe in the spirit that delights in your being, and then you exhale it. You're here because the world could use that. All of us are called to be enlightened witnesses, people who, through your kindness and tenderness and focused, attentive love, return people to themselves. At Homeboy, we're kind of allergic to the notion of holding the bar up and asking homies to measure up, because I don't think our God ever does that. Why would we do it? Instead, we hold the mirror up and tell people the truth, knowing that your truth is my truth and my truth is a gang member's truth. It's all the same truth. Here's the truth. You are exactly what God had in mind when God made you. Oh, nobly born. And then people who have had unspeakable things done to them, they become that truth. They inhabit that truth. And no bullet can pierce it. No 4 prison walls can keep it out. And death can't touch it, because this is a huge thing to know and remember who you really are. Anchored in love, sustained and tethered to a sustaining God, and not even the least bit shaky in your own unshakable goodness. The Acts of the Apostles has a sentence, and it says, and awe came upon everyone. It suggests that the measure of health may well reside in our ability to stand in awe at what the poor have to carry, rather than in judgment at how they carry it. I stole that from Pema. I've been using it all these years. It's kind of a confession. Homeboy is kind of like the Discovery Channel. I remember a homie named Jermaine, and he's was one of our trainees in our 18-month training program. About 30 years old, African-American gang member. He came into my office and he said, I discovered something today. And he proceeded to tell me that when he was 9, he was lying on the floor watching TV. And he could see through his peripheral vision that somebody had stepped into the room, and it was his mother. And she was standing in the doorway, and her arms were extended. And as he brings focus to bear, he sees that she has deeply and profoundly slit her wrists, and blood is coursing onto the floor. And she says, "See what you made me do." Well, the next day he was taken from her care and put in foster system. Most telling of all is his two older sibs weren't, underscoring this untruth that somehow he had been the cause of something. So that was 9. At 12, he got jumped into a gang, and at 17, from that moment forward, he was raised by incarceration. And here he is, sobbing in my office. And I looked at him, I said, "So what did you discover today?" And he said, "I discovered today that I had always preferred my rage to my shame." And because he had made that discovery, he was, for the first time in his life, able to forgive his mother for having been mentally ill, and to forgive himself for having once been a 9-year-old boy. And awe came upon everyone. Homies try to make friends with their wounds, because if they don't, like all of us, we get tempted to despise the wounded. And the hope is that if we can, in exquisite mutuality, look at each other and with breathless delight say, "You're here." And there's only one response to that, which is to say, "You're here." And somehow, kinship so quickly. The first venture that we tried, and I'll end with this, was Homeboy Bakery. And we started this bakery in 1992. A movie producer named Ray Stark, who happened to have $500 million, read an article and summoned me to his office, and he said, "How should I spend my money?" I can see now that I woefully undershot my request. But I said, "You could buy this abandoned bakery across the street from the school at Dolores Mission, and it has ovens. We could put hairnets on rival gang members." Just to mess with them. And then we could call it Homeboy Bakery, and that was the extent of my business plan. And he said, "Sure," so he funded it. And, it was a famous place, and was kind of well known in that setting. And this was a time when there were no exit ramps for any gang members off this crazy, violent freeway. So because there was no way off, even in their imagination, it compounded their despair, which only increased the violence. But then Homeboy Industries in 1988, was this exit ramp. And but in 1999, it burned to the ground. And in that iteration, and we're now thriving where we are now in Chinatown. But and in those days, it was hard to, I would write an op-ed piece in the LA Times suggesting that maybe gang members were human beings. And it's hard to even retrieve that period. The first 10 years of Homeboy was death threats, bomb threats, hate mail. Never from gang members, because they always got what the message of hope was. But it was for people who had demonized, and if the demonization was complete and whole enough, it was only a short hop to demonize me for helping them. The friend of our enemy is our enemy. So we always brace ourselves after I wrote an op-ed piece in those days, because we would get all this hate mail and calls and stuff. In fact, once I remember I was sitting in my office, in our very first office, and about 10 feet away in the outer office was a homegirl named Jessica, and she was 16 years old, right out of probation camp, a tough cookie, lived in the housing projects, a gang member. Very professionally, she answers the phone. Homeboy Industries, how may I help you? Bring that bomb over here, motherfucker. That's right. Yeah, that's correct. 1848 East First Street. And I go, Jessica, what is that exactly? Oh, it's some fool who wants to blow the place up. I go, how about God bless you and have a nice day? She's giving the mad bomber MapQuest. So the bakery burned to the ground, and I remember getting the call at 3 in the morning and racing over there, and the women from the projects were, hugging me and crying and saying, don't worry, tomorrow we'll have a venta de comida, we'll sell food. And a homegirl named Lucero came up, and she was like 15, and she says, don't worry, G, we'll have a car wash. Which I'm sure would put us right over the top. So when I got there, it was just a lot of fire trucks and flames through the roof, and somebody must have pointed me out to the head kind of fire inspector, and we found out within an hour's time that it was a natural cause. It was an old building, and the wiring or something percolated, so the fire inspector came up to me and says, you the owner? I said, yeah, I guess. Do you have any reason to believe why some of them might have started this fire? And I said, no, You didn't have any kind of disgruntled ex-employees, do you? I said, no, all the disgruntled ones are still working for me. And then he leaned in like he was going to confide something, and he said, well, this area where the bakery's located? I said, yeah. And he goes, it's known for hoodlums, he said to me. Like this news might come as a surprise to me. And I said, I think we're good there, because at Homeboy Industries, we only hire hoodlums. So the sun came up, we called all the homies. It was a crew of about 12, all enemies, all rivals. Yeah, but we couldn't get this one kid, Danny, and Danny arrives with his uniform bien planchada and Homeboy Bakery here, and Danny emblazoned here, and his step is light as he walks from the bus, and then he sees smoke is still wafting through the roof, and the homies, the enemies, co-workers are kind of picking through the rubble, the soggy mess that's been pulled out by the firefighters, and he sees what this is. And he just freezes, and he just puts his face in his hands, and he just begins to wail and weep, because this was a whole lot more than a job. It was his reason to get up in the morning, and his reason not to gangbang the night before. It was the place where he discovered that he was nobly born. And he never knew that before. So we just put our arms around him and promised that we'd rebuild, and we did. But in those first years, in 92 of the bakery to 99, it was a famous place, and people would come for tours all the time, and busloads of Japanese tourists, and Prince Charles, his business advisors came to see the famous Homeboy Bakery. So it was TV crews all the time. And at the time, we had a foreman named Roman, and he was one of the biggest drug dealers I'd ever known, gang member. I would offer him a job and a way out, and he politely said no. Then in recovery, you say it takes what it takes. It can be the the death of a friend, the birth of a son, a long stretch in prison. For him, I think it might have been the birth of his daughter, Clarissa. And so I brought him into the bakery, and he worked there as a baker. Well, he was a leader in his gang, so he ended up becoming a leader. He was the foreman. And it's hard to work with your enemies, but it's even harder to supervise them, you know. But he did a wonderful job. But the part he didn't like was he didn't like giving tours. So tour groups would come in and TV crews, and he hated this, you know. So I got a request from a group from the Central California, a bunch of farmers, guys who own farms, and they wanted to come see the famous Homeboy Bakery. And I said, sure. And so I'm waiting there with Roman, and he's having a bad attitude day. He just doesn't want to give this tour. And I said, get over it. And the bus comes in. And I'm waving. You can park over there, and it's a slick, sleek, ultra-modern bus. It's the one that has the microphone, you know, at the front for the tour guide. And Roman sees the microphone. He pretends he's the tour guide, you know. Welcome to Homeboy Bakery. Observe gang members in their natural habitat. Please keep your hands in the bus at all times. Do not attempt to feed the homies. They are not yet tame, you know. I say, cállate, cabrón. And so I greet them, and then I leave. If you know at Homeboy, I never give tours. The homies give tours. So I went back to my office. Well, when I came back later on in the afternoon, it triggered when I saw Roman there, I said, well, hey, how did that tour go? He goes, damn, gee, what's up with white people anyway? I said, I don't know. What is up with us? He said, well, they always be using the word great. You know, watch out, this busload of gabachos that come in here and they see the bakery, everything's clean and all the machines and all the ovens. They go, wow, this place is great. And they see the homies, enemies, rivals working side by side with each other. You fellas are great. And then they try the bread. They go, oh my gosh, it's great. He says, why do white people always be using the word great? I said, I don't know. This is the first I've ever heard of it. And trust me, from that moment forward, every opportunity I could find, I told him how great he was. Just to mess with them. So in those days, the bakery would close at 11, and so I would often swing by at closing time, and I was parking my car in the bakery parking lot, and Roman sees me, he runs to me. Well, the guy's never excited about anything. I could barely get out of the car. You're not going to believe what happened yesterday. Well, he tells me that after his shift, he went to go pick up his 4-year-old daughter, Clarissa, and she was at the babysitter's, and he puts her in the car, and he drives her home to their humble little apartment where for the first time in his life he's paying rent with honestly earned, clean, decent money. And he unlocks the front door, and she goes running down this tiny little hallway, and she lands in the sala, in the living room, and she plants her feet, she extends her arms, she takes the whole room in with her eyes, and she says, "This is great." And he says to me, "I thought she was turning white on me." And he gets down to her eye level and says, "Mija, what's great?" And little Clarissa clutches her heart and she says, "My home." Well, as soon as he says those two words, the two of us immediately, our eyes fill up with tears, immediate. And we're staring at each other, and tears are flowing down our cheeks, and we can't speak for what feels like an eternity. Until finally, I broke the silence, and I said, "You did this. You've never had a home in your life, and now you got one. You did this. You were the biggest drug dealer in town, and you stopped, and you baked bread instead. You did this. You've never had a father in your life, and now you are one. And I hate to have to tell you, but you're great. And I hate to have to tell you that the first time I ever retrieved that story to tell it was at his funeral some months later. And he was packing his car in the projects. He was going to go on a camping trip. And two guys came in with their faces covered, and they must have seen him. They must have thought he'll do, and they executed him. But the span of time from his death to his burial, the question I most was asked by his homies was a good one. What's the point of doing good if that can happen to you? And I thought it was a good question, worthy of an answer. So I stood in front of that packed church and I said, here's the point. Before he left us, he knew the truth of who he was, that he was exactly what God had in mind. Oh, nobly born was he. And he remembered in a community of tenderness who he really was. And no bullet can pierce it. No 4 prison walls can keep it out. And death can't touch it because it's great. And we receive the tender glance of God, and we can feel really the utter fullness and compelled that we can't do anything else but to be that tender glance in the world. For indeed it's true. It's a lie, any talk of God that doesn't comfort you. You're here. And because you want to be that tender glance, you go to the margins and you fast like Miguel Lugo. And you say, we're going to love you into submission, and we're going to imagine a circle of compassion, and then imagine nobody standing outside of it. Together we're going to, with tenderness and an open heart, we want to dismantle the barriers that exclude. And pretty soon we all cease to care whether anyone accuses us of wasting our time. For in this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Pema, and thank you for allowing voices to be heard.
All right. So we're all here.
Jose, before we start, could I just say something?
Definitely.
So, when I read your book, and I read this line that you quoted here about better to stand in awe of what people have to carry, hold, rather than in judgment of how they carry it. I thought, that is a great line. And I almost used it.
It quoted me.
And quoted you. Did I really say that?
You said that, and there's another one is, I say often.
I think that's so funny that I picked it out as the real gem.
That's probably why.
The book is good, but that line
That's
is
probably why, because you said it.
But the other one is, the measure of our compassion lies not in our service of those on the margins, but only in our willingness to be in kinship with them.
I said that too?
You said that too. I'm telling you, I'm a student of yours.
I'm going to work with her on copywriting some of this stuff so you can't just use it whenever you want. I always thought you said that stuff.
I know.
Thank you, Pema, for teaching him all you taught him.
It takes too much time to attribute stuff to everybody. We don't have time.
No.
What else did she say? Because you've told me a lot of stuff. No, I just want to thank the both of you because I was in at hearing. How do you say that word again?
Bodhisattva?
Bodhisattva.
Yeah.
So I'm reading Comfortable with Uncertainty, right? And every time it's in that book, right?
Bodhisattva.
And every time I would see it, because I didn't know how to pronounce it, I just made up like what it said. So I would say Bodhicitta. I'm like, I'm down with that, like, because you explained what it was in the book, but I didn't know how to pronounce it until tonight. So, yeah, I mean, I'm just so thankful for being up here to share this experience with you guys. This is like what changed my life. These things that you're talking about, you talk about the pain and you talk about the kinship and together how these experiences shape us, shape the way we see ourselves and the way we see the world. And from my own experience, that's what it was, just growing up and having these negative experiences.
Right.
I began to see myself a certain way, and then I began to see the world a certain way, and then I behaved a certain way because of the way I saw everything.
Right.
And then I entered into this exquisite place of kinship, unconditional love and compassion. And then I begin to see like my own worth. Like, damn, maybe my life does matter.
Yeah.
And when I began to see that, I was able to see everyone else's life and how their lives mattered and how important other people's lives were. And I wanted to be able to provide that same experience. So it's an honor to be up here with you guys and to be able to have a conversation about these things, with all these people that are here to experience it with us. So I'm thankful for that. I guess like maybe just out the gate, just since we're like talking about spirituality and stuff, what is your guys' take on God? I'm just saying,
Since Greg has already shared his take.
All right.
But, so I'm kind of uncomfortable with it.
Okay.
And when you get under it and what it's referring to, then it's the same. Let's say in terms of all that you're saying and that was said earlier about who we really are, being valuable and decent and whole. Like we use the term basic goodness. People have basic. What's basic is good. And when you begin to feel that about yourself, it changes everything. So sometimes, what does the word God refer to, but if when it refers to all those kind of things, which when you talk about it, it does. And then also just this whole view of life, which is not caught up in small-mindedness and polarization. When I was saying about the most profound level of compassion or the action of the Bodhisattva, and saying Homeboy dealt with it worked with it by having gang members work together, that closed-mindedness would be what blocks out, you would say, God. And I would say it would be what would block a person's realization of who they really are. So when you get into the language, like, I know that we wouldn't argue.
I
Would
quote
we?
you too much to argue.
But the God language actually makes me uncomfortable. So that's interesting right there, since I talk about comfortable with uncomfortableness. And
So thank you for asking a question.
yeah,
that I
I
just-
wanted to make you uncomfortable.
So I'm sitting here, sort of thinking, oh, God, I wish you'd stop talking about God quite so much. And then I'm thinking, well,
How do you remain
work
comfortable
with it,
with
Pema,
uncertainty?
So it's funny what brings you to that place of really feeling uneasy and stuff. So I'm not quite sure why exactly. Maybe it was bad Catholic childhood
Yeah.
or something.
Bad experiences.
I
Yeah,
suspect.
maybe
Back
bad
to your
experiences.
experiences,
Yeah, probably bad experiences. But why I resonate so much with what you're doing and what you say in the books and all that is because the message is what you get to, what you're calling God, that I understand, I just don't call it God.
Yeah.
I call it uncovering what is basic and good in humanity, and that you don't need to call it something that, my problem with it is that it sounds like it's something other. And do you think of it as something other?
No.
Yeah. So so the word God to me always indicates that there's something other that's sort of
Yeah.
that you're referring to, rather than the sense of kinship so much. You see what I'm saying?
Oh, sure.
It's like father figure or something
Right,
like that.
right.
So that's where my discomfort comes from.
I'm sorry for making you uncomfortable. And I apologize on behalf of Gene for mentioning God so many
Sure,
times.
throw me under the bus. But the thing about the innate goodness, or the what I would call the unshakable goodness in every person is so important right now, especially when you're dealing with gang members. So in many ways things have evolved and things have changed and people aren't so demonizing, and yet you can get in the State of the Union calling animals and MS-13 and you want to, so in my language I would say that's the opposite of who God is. That's the opposite of the truth. That
Yeah.
part of the thing that happens when two enemies are making croissants together, and you pronounce that so well.
I really love that.
Croissants.
Croissants.
Croissant.
Croissant. There you go. I can't say it, but it was the experience of them that you cannot demonize people you know.
Yeah.
And so a lot of it is just about vicinity, and that if you can put people in the same vicinity. But you want to say there's no exception to that. Now, as you were talking about what blocks you, what keeps your heart hard or your mind closed, is that possibility is open to everybody. And that truth is in everybody, whether they demonize or are polarizing or want to call human beings animals or think that kids should be in cages. And that's kind of, obviously we're on the same page on everything,
Obviously.
So quit stirring stuff up.
I apologize. Obviously, the wording is just different.
Well, think what a bomber this evening would be if he hadn't asked that question.
It would have just been surface level. We'd never gotten any
Very
depth.
good,
Yeah.
very good.
But I
That's
like
right.
what you're saying. It's in all of us. It's our choice to kind of activate it. But then there has to be an experience, I think.
So-
Like something has to be created, right?
Yeah, that's right.
But what
That's right.
do you believe about, because there's this, good guys, bad hombres, evil. So you had in Santa Fe, Texas, where another shooting, and Senator Ted Cruz got up and said, today the people of Texas have seen the face of evil, talking about the 17-year-old boy who did it. Then they cut to a 16-year-old girl who's a classmate who was there, and she said, anyone who does such a thing has a world of hurt inside here. Well, here are two points of view. So, but how do you address the part where people will say, well, some people are just evil, or this is a good guy or a bad guy, which I don't buy in any sense.
No, I don't buy it at all. So the way I think about that is, and why the Buddhist teachings were appealing to me, is because if to use really simple language, if our basic nature is that our mind is open and our heart is warm,
Mm-hmm.
then that kind of language is covering over the basic nature. That kind of language comes out of some kind of deep hurt or something is. That's the deepest kind of suffering. You see, that's what I was saying. The Bodhisattva wants to remove that level of suffering where you can demonize people. That would be considered in Buddhism actually the greatest of all the sufferings.
Yeah.
Is to be able to have your mind be that closed and be able to feel that hatred like that.
Yeah.
So, you use words like polarized and biased and all of that, but the degree to which that can go, where the hatred is that deep, where people can do such horrible things to other people. So just to answer you, if the basic nature of mind is open, and mind and heart open, then those things are the greatest suffering for the individual whose minds who engages in them. The greatest suffering of all, the Bodhisattva would want to remove that above all,
right.
That kind of hatred. And I think Homeboy does that for the people that come into Homeboy,
Yeah.
And then I imagine there's a lot of people who have changed their views because of what happens at Homeboy, in terms of where their minds were polarized and their hearts were closed against whole populations, and that's, the Bodhisattva would say that would be make their life the most worthwhile.
That's right.
Because at the level of outer suffering, which is so extreme, but you can help people meet their basic needs much more easily than you can change hearts. And so, you see what I'm saying?
Sure.
So, but I don't see why you have to attribute it to God or something outside, sort of seemingly outside.
See what you started?
I mean,
Cheers.
but now, please do not think that my intention is to try to talk you out of using the word God.
I told him when we started, I said, I want to wear a robe. I want to wear a monk robe when we come up here to do this because I'm ready to, because I believe in the philosophy, right? And so the Bodhisattva, in an instance when they want to when you would want to relieve that type of
deep suffering, yeah,
kinship and love is the avenue to relieve that.
That's right.
And that is we're talking about the same thing. We're just speaking in different languages.
We just, kind of mess it up
Using
with the word
words.
God.
It's the wording. But we're talking about the same thing.
So I don't mean to be harsh.
No, I'm just. We're friends. We're friends.
It makes them. I don't know. There's no point pretending otherwise. So I do think that language gets in the way a lot. And we all come up against that, right? You just use the wrong language and you feel somebody.
For sure.
And then you're saying, oh, I'm sorry I used that particular.
But because there are a few people, who believe in God, that I would always want to call them to a more fuller sense, So I think we've settled for a puny God, a partial God.
Yeah.
And which has nothing to do with the God we actually have.
Right.
And so if it's a language that people connect to the God thing, and I'm a Jesuit priest and I can't do anything about that. But I always because I've heard you speak before too about Dylan Roof and who went in and killed all those people in Mother Emanuel Church, and And I've heard you once speak about how, whatever it was, a week later, family members of the victims stood in front of him and said, "We forgive you." Now, part of my way of talking would be to say, that's the God we actually have.
The people who said, "We forgive you."
Yes.
Yeah.
That we forgive you with a great reservoir of love. And then 9 months later, when they sentenced him to be executed and called it God's justice,
Yeah.
that's the God we've settled for. That's the partial God. That's, the more realistic God.
That's not your God.
No.
Yeah.
That's not the God we actually have. So those of us who use the language about God, I think it's important to always, St. Ignatius of Loyola always talks about the God who's always greater.
Always.
Always greater. Always
Greater?
great.
That
Yes,
same word?
yes. He was kind of a white guy, but always greater than our puny kind of notions. And I
Right.
know you were raised in that,
That's
which
right.
was puny, partial.
Yeah.
I mean, and
Yeah.
we settle for the third grade God. So I'm saying if you have one, and if you believe in God, you want to graduate from the third grade. You want to go
Right.
to this spacious, expansive sense. But
Right.
it's the same.
Right.
Ask
Well,
a question that has nothing to do with God.
Okay. So,
But I understand. I understand that.
Yeah.
And that makes sense to me to want to
Work with it. You know how
make the word stand for what it really stands for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
see where I started? So I do have a couple questions here that we can get into. What is the most important thing to you?
For him, it's God.
All right. Shots fired.
For both of us, it's alleviating suffering, wouldn't
Yeah.
you say?
Yeah.
And I've always, I have a place in me that thinks, I wish I had actually really been able to alleviate suffering the way you do. Like in the trenches, I would call it, like really get my hands dirty. But instead, I never get my hands dirty. I travel around in kind of a little bubble. And so it's gratifying to me when people tell me, that they were going to commit suicide, and then they read my book, and they saved their life, and things like that. And then I think, well, that's helpful, obviously. So, but you see what I'm saying? Like I so admire that level of bodhisattva activity, like that you do, and mine's. I don't put it down, but I admire very, very much, and wish I had in my life been able to do more of that kind of thing that you do.
Well, it's funny because what feeds, the thing that's important to me, I always talk about extravagant tenderness. And I'm reading this book that my spiritual director who was out there, Sergio, said, and you wrote a foreword to this book, and it's a brand new book about tenderness.
Oh, yeah, training in tenderness.
But what's the word? T-S?
Oh, the word is sewa.
Sewa.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know what the word in it.
Well, so he says it's when I would hear him give talks on this. So this is a book by one of the teachers that I studied with, Zigor Khantrul Rinpoche, and he wrote this book, Training in Tenderness. And it's about sewa, which sounds like S-E-W-A.
Yeah.
Does
And
that mean God? Say what?
No, it means tenderness.
So no, actually, when I heard him give the talks, he wouldn't tell you. He said it can't be adequately translated, but it's a warm-hearted feeling that when you feel it for people, you feel alive and good. And when people feel it coming toward them, they feel safe and like they can relax. Well, actually, the translation that they use for sewa usually is love. Love.
But tenderness is so rich.
Yeah, tenderness is a much
because-
better word, actually.
Yeah, because love stays. Because we always say at Homeboy that love is if love is the answer, community is the context, but tenderness is the methodology.
Yeah.
This is how at Homeboy, our experience is how suffering gets alleviated in community with extravagant tenderness.
Right.
Because tenderness then becomes connective tissue, as opposed to I love you or
That's right.
I love you.
That's
but
right.
tenderness somehow, I don't even know, it's a thing that I'm exploring more now because of you and the soft-centered, tender, that's where you meet people. That's where it becomes exquisitely mutual, where I'm not saving you, I'm not even serving you. I'm trying to anyway, to be reached by him.
Yeah.
And then it becomes so mutual and so life-giving. But tender, I find, is sort of a thing right now for me.
It's a much better word than love.
Than love.
I feel it is too.
Yeah.
Much more, because love is too loaded a word.
Yeah.
It almost doesn't touch you.
Yeah.
The word doesn't touch
That's
you, whereas
right.
the word tenderness actually does. Yeah, so.
Yeah.
And where do you guys think that deep desire to relieve suffering comes from for each of you? Like, where does it come from? What is the root of that? And what inspired that for you to want that, for that to be the most important thing to you?
What do you think, Jose?
God,
Yes.
I guess.
No.
Ooh. Well, that's what you would say, right? Probably.
Well, I don't know if I would say that exactly. I mean, I think that's part of your experience. But I don't feel like
Well, like grace or something like that? then?
yeah,
Well, I would say because for me, it's the experience I had with it. So for me, like, I thought I was going to be a construction worker, to be honest, after like I got my life together and I began to heal. But it was the experiences I had in the relationship, in the tender relationship, that inspired
so why do you
me.
do what you do?
That's what the tenderness I experienced in these relationships, they inspired me to be that in all of my relationships. I had an experience, so you were mentioning, you were actually mentioning somebody up there that G had talked about when she said, I wish you were God so you can welcome me into heaven. That same person is the one that welcomed me into Homeboy.
Oh, yeah.
And if it wasn't for that person, if it wasn't for the tenderness that person approached me with, I wouldn't be sitting on this stage with you guys today.
Right.
The experience that I had with that person, it was heavenly.
Yeah.
You know, I felt like somebody seen me and that my life mattered.
Right.
And she took me through the process so tender. And when the moments came where I said, you know what, I don't trust anybody else but you. Because there was times where she would be like, hey, Jose, you know, you need a male figure. I can only take you so far. And I would tell her, no, I don't trust anybody else but you. And she was so tender with me and walked me and held my hand through the whole process of this healing. And because of that experience, I wanted to create that experience in the world.
Yeah.
For other people.
For other people. I wanted to create that experience for my children. And so...
Well, maybe for you and I, it came from the fact that we came from really loving families where our families made us feel good about ourselves.
Yeah.
Because I certainly did, and you certainly
Yeah, I
did.
did, yeah.
So that somehow the fact that we were loved as kids, so some people learn, like for you, you get it through having a hard life, and then tenderness comes towards you. And we were blessed that we had easy lives, but a lot of tenderness and love came towards us, so we felt we were okay, you know, we felt good about ourselves, and then somehow you want to pay it back. Something like that.
But it's also about joy, you know, because we always think things are, like if your job is to alleviate suffering, then I always feel like the most selfish human being I know. I mean, where the joy is at Homeboy Industries.
Right.
That's
true.
why I'm there. Not because, you know, it's a tough job, somebody's got to do it, you know. But it's really about, it's where the joy is. And And it's about delight. And it's about showing up, and people are hilarious, and people are heartbreaking, and people are so vulnerable, and people are so trusting that it's joyful, because William Carlos Williams, who's an American poet, and he used to say of poetry, if it ain't a pleasure, it ain't a poem. And I find that that's sort of what Homeboy's about, that it's, you kind of like, that's a secret. You don't want to, this is really fun. This is really joyful. This is really life-enhancing and delightful. And like it somehow has to be a grim duty, and it isn't.
Okay, I resonate with that.
Yeah.
I really resonate with that. It brings me so much joy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why you do
I really
it.
resonate with that.
Yeah.
I really resonate with that answer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We got the best jobs in the world, you guys.
So, see the
I
clock there?
resonate with that. One last question
One last question.
So
from
the,
me.
So the
from me.
clock be damned, is
So-
that
Is
what
that
you're
the
No,
saying?
the
clock?
audience is. I got some.
Okay.
We're gonna get to the audience's questions,
Okay.
but what is your favorite song and why?
My-
It doesn't matter what genre, neither. You can pick any genre.
I was tempted to say, I can't get no satisfaction. I wouldn't really say that was my favorite song, but I like the lyrics.
That's a good one.
These are none of the questions I suggested he ask.
What's
No, I'm convinced once
your
through one ear. I don't have any favorite songs. I don't really do songs. I listen to Pema's CDs.
All right. Well, the soundtrack.
She's my favorite song.
The
Oh, I wish
soundtrack
we
to
could get into
Comfortable
this, though,
Without a
because I
Soundtrack.
got a real revelation by the other last question where I came up with that it was because it's joyful.
Yeah.
Maybe we could get to something like that with our favorite song as well.
I'm asking good questions here, dog.
But I guess I don't do songs so much either.
Yeah. I know.
Except for that one.
Yeah.
So now we're going to move into questions from the audience. If you guys have any questions, and we'll try to keep these questions as brief as possible so that we can get as many questions as possible. And if you can keep your questions kind of universal so they pertain to all of us here that are partaking in this event.
How are we
And you
gonna-
can begin to line up in the aisle. There's going to be microphones on each end. And I guess
Can
we
you see them? Jose?
I can see them now.
Okay.
Yeah, they've
I
turned
guess
the
we can
lights
start
up a little
lining up
bit.
now for questions.
Oh, good. Look at all those people out there.
Do you see the clock?
We went over.
No, it was at 9.
Gotcha. I like that song too. I can't get no.
Yes, well, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Pema, I just want to say I think you're doing great work. For those of us that suffer from depression, your books are magical, so thank you. And I guess my question is, in times like what we have right now, where there's so much just strife, I guess, how do you keep such an open heart to be a bodhisattva for all of suffering that we're currently seeing at the border and in the U.S. and elsewhere?
Is that for both of us?
That's
For
for you.
both you, I guess partially to you, but if Greg also has.
Maybe I'll say something and then you say something?
Sure.
Well, first thing I'd say is, don't go away there, just in case. Such a joy to be able to actually see you. So the first thing I would say is well, it's not easy, to do that. So you just start with the intention that you're going to keep your heart open. And then a lot of what you end up doing is noticing for the first time how closed it is and how keep your mind open, and you notice for the first time really the extent to which you have your own prejudices and biases and criticism and judgments and opinions. And so you begin to open your heart to yourself, for you begin to have some kind of sense of kindness towards yourself, being a human being who isn't perfect. And by that kindness to oneself, then those hard-hearted views and opinions start to melt. So it's interesting. It has to do with when you see how closed you are, instead of then turning against yourself, you're kind to yourself. And as a result of that, you begin to be kind to your ability to feel kindness in bigger and bigger, wider and wider situations begins to grow. And that's how it works. I know that's how it works. What do you say, Greg?
Well, I also think the times in which we live remind us of the things that we care about. And so oddly, I think it sort of brought into focus the things that we find valuable, because we've had to deal with this moment in time. And so you're always trying to challenge yourself. I think we get into this thing where we want to win the argument, and which is a way of something you talk about often is escalating. Don't escalate.
Don't escalate.
Well,
yeah.
winning the argument or seeking to do that is an escalation of a kind.
Yes, it is.
And it's like, well then, and it's no more appropriate for me to demonize Donald Trump than for him to demonize members of MSNBC, who I'm certain he demonizes more than MS-13. But so you kind of say, we all have, this innate goodness and unshakable goodness, and it's there. Everybody has that. There are no exceptions to that. And that I think he's kind of worthy of our compassion, because I can't imagine. Anyway, if you can get to that place, which is hard to get to. But then it reminds you of what matters to us. What do we care about?
Mm-hmm.
And where do we want to stand in the face of it all? Then it becomes not so much a denunciation, though you have to clearly go to the border and resist, as people are doing today. But it's also announcing about the power of connection and relational wholeness and kinship, and we belong to each other, and we've forgotten that we belong to each other.
Thank you very much.
So you're running this.
Sorry. Next question.
In the last year and a half to 2 years, there's been such an increase in hate speech and hate treatment and sometimes murderous violence, especially against minorities. We're seeing it on the border right now with families looking for asylum. How I feel time is an issue. How do we respond in a timely fashion to really make a change, not just wait for eventually this is going to happen, because people are really being impacted badly now.
Jose?
Yeah, Jose, what do you say?
Love is the answer. Well, I was thinking about what you were saying a little while ago, about when we begin to love ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
and the way we begin to see ourselves. So Father Mark, I remember when I first started meditating, I couldn't sit in the room because I couldn't close my eyes. I didn't feel safe in a room with other people and having my eyes closed. But he would say, when you're at home, just sit with yourself for a couple of minutes. Hopefully this makes sense and it kind of answers your question, but he would say, sit at home with yourself for even if it's 2 minutes. And when you do that, you're telling yourself, that you love yourself. You're giving yourself 2 minutes to just be alone with yourself, and that's important. And that means you love yourself. And I started to do that, and I began to love myself. And then I began to love everyone around me. But I think that love is the answer. But we have to realize it within our own self first. How do I view myself, see myself, and what am I doing to love and care for myself? And then eventually I'll be doing that with everyone around me. I think it's as simple as whatever's within our capacity. Like, because I was thinking about it this morning. I got up early and I was driving. It was raining a little bit, and there was homeless people sleeping in the rain. And then I was thinking about everything that's happening on the border. And I was like, damn, us as a society, are we desensitized? Like, are we not doing, like, can it stop now? And I was like, what is the solution? Because I feel like it needs to stop now. And I realized the solution is whatever's within my capacity to do. Like whatever's within Jose's capacity.
Yeah.
It's just love, compassion.
Yeah.
I hope that helped. Next question.
Hello, good evening. Pema, we really love your teaching. We all do. Thank you so much. Greg, we really love your tortilla chips. Thank you so much. But my question for both of you, when I really get into the grief, when I touch in the grief in the world, I'm down on the floor sobbing. It is just so difficult, so despairing. And when I'm really in touch with my joy, last week I'm on top of Morro Rock in Sequoia, blowing bubbles, joy. How do you reconcile the two?
Oh, well, you don't. I mean, if you want to use the word reconcile, it's just say, well, that's what it means to be human. You hold the whole thing. And a lot of really the basis of the suffering in the world and the problems is that people want to think that somehow they could just get rid of the painful part and just have the joyful part. And when you begin to embrace the whole thing as what it means to be human, or animal for that matter, and then, so it's not like reconciling it, it's just like realizing that's the complete picture, and you could open your heart and mind to that. What do you think?
Yeah. I think Native communities, think that grieving is kind of a gift, and I've buried 222 young people killed because of gang violence, and you discover, a power greater than death, and you discover fates that are worse than death, and yet you kind of want to welcome it all. And part of the thing at Homeboy, the quality of the healing, though I think it's an essential fundamental healing, acknowledging that all of us our healing ends in the graveyard, that people kind of find their own kind of steadiness in the face of grief and in the face of joy, and they can feel all these things like they had been numb before. We drug test constantly, not because we're prudes about drugs. It's because we want folks to feel it all and welcome it all and make friends with it all. And then, because eventually folks leave Homeboy and they've re-identified who they are in the world, and they've come to know the truth of who they are, and now they're resilient, and now they leave Homeboy, and the world will throw at them what it will, but this time they're not going to be toppled by it. And that's what you want. That's where there's a steadiness to it that says, I think it was Ram Dass or somebody asked him, why are you so calm and peaceful? And he says, I don't mind what happens. And I think it was Annie Lamott who...
No, I said that.
Pema said it, but she was quoting Ram Dass. But I remember Annie Lamott got pissed off at that. She was mad at him for saying, I don't mind what happens. Because it's like you have to mind what happens. But I know what he means. It's like, it's not to say it's all the same, but it's all gift. It's grief, it's joy, it's what's happening in the present moment. I don't want to live any other place but right here. in Royce Hall with these two amazing people and all of you. And,
And by the way,
right. And so anyway,
Thank you.
I hope that helped. Next question.
Hi, I'm Kim, alcoholic. Oh, wrong meeting. Okay.
welcome.
Thank you so much. You bring me joy. And you, Jose, are hilarious. Okay.
You're not even trying.
I know. You should be stand-up. So, I'm a recovering Catholic, and don't go crazy, Pema, but my God's name is Lou.
Lou.
Yeah, Lou. Anyway, I'm bipolar, so I'm really familiar with depression and mania and stuff, and I get it. I mean, that's who I am. I have to accept it, and I feel it, and it lets go of me, blah, blah, blah. But, not to be political, but Trump is driving me fucking crazy. It's like, I have to increase my medication. I'm doing everything I could. I call my senators, I protest, I donate money, but I can't sit by and watch what's happening to babies, to different minorities and everything, and really not being able to do anything. So like what you said, do what you can. It's not enough. So how do I either figure out how to do more or deal with it so I don't kill myself? Well, then I would have to read your book, which saved my life a million times, When Things Go Bad. Is that it? That's it. Sorry.
Fall apart.
Yeah. Fall apart. Okay, go ahead. So what do I do?
She referenced your book, so.
That's right. She referenced your book.
Your book.
So I have to answer the
That's
question.
right. Them's the rules.
Them's the rules. I think that it comes down to we wish it was faster and we wish there were simple solutions, but there aren't. That so many multiple causes came together to make the situation be happening, and so many multiple situations, causes are going to come together if things begin to shift. So it will be the result of a lot of people's actions, but the most important thing is what's been being said, which is if those actions come out of hatred, if those actions against the current administration, against the president, come out of hatred and come out of aggression, then what's the difference? It's like both sides are adding more aggression and hatred to the planet. So it has to come out of changing your attitude. So I guess that's saying that your work from now until you die is to just work with continually loving, being kind to yourself, being compassionate towards yourself, and then by extension of that, all the other people that are in your exact same situations, and by extension from that, all the people that are caught in closed mind and hard heart, and you know, it's the attitude behind the whole thing that really eventually will be the causes that will shift something. But to just try to hurry it up, so then you're adding impatience, and just to be more and more full of hatred, then you're just adding more hatred. Mm-hmm. So do you see what I'm saying about what is it you're cultivating in going about making the trying to help things change? You know. So.
Next question.
First, I have to say, Pema, you've been my teacher for years, and I appreciate you.
Oh, thank you.
And Doctor, I'm getting to know you. I have just begun.
How do you like the tortilla chips?
I haven't tried. I'll have to do that. My question is sort of an extension of hers, and I'm going to bet you're going to give the same answer. But I have extreme rage at his followers. I don't understand. My frustration is I don't know how. I want them to listen to reality, or my reality, forget reality, and I don't know how. Anyway, that's my question.
Do I have to do this? Not that I mind, actually, but I don't feel that way about the people that are followers of the president. I was reading this book just this week by Van Jones called Beyond the Messy Truth. And he I forget where he grew up, West Virginia maybe or something like that. But anyway, he said that when he would go home before the elections, he said all you had to do was go into the middle of the country, and then you would hear not a lot of bigoted, prejudiced, hateful people, but people who were really hurting, and they just felt overlooked and overlooked and overlooked, and that nobody was listening to them, and their life was going. None of the politicians had helped them, and so something so different was why they voted for Trump. And so his view was we have to have our minds be big enough that we start working together across the aisle. And so for instance, he works with Newt Gingrich, because there's certain areas, he said, their politics don't agree at all. But for instance, on prison reform, they really agree. And so they work together on that. And there's one other area that they really agree on too. And he said, we have to start doing more of that kind of thing rather than this polarized thinking that just because they're of a different political party or have different views on a lot of things, find the places that you are in agreement and work for change with those things, and not get so caught up in the views, polarized views. So I think I agree with that.
And my experience is when people have moral outrage, and have lived through this for many years of, gang violence, and the invitation is to get underneath it. What language is that speaking? And then once you get people into, I wonder what that's about. And so we're kind of quick to label and to dismiss and to reduce, when everything is about something else. And so the task is to find, I don't want to call it just sophisticated, but to get underneath. I wonder what that's about, which Pema was just addressing. I wonder what that's about.
The voting.
The voting, or, an opinion that I don't agree with, or and it fills you with rage, and you go, oh my gosh, don't you see, And yet it's kind of like, I wonder what that's about. Just because at the human level, and we go through this all the time. We always talk at Homeboy, don't get tripped up by behavior.
Because it's a symptom.
It's a symptom. It's a language. I wonder what was that about? Rather than say zero tolerance, for this action. This happens at Homeboy only every day, where you just go, we want to understand what that meant when you threw down in the bakery or whatever it is.
So when you stole a loaf of bread.
That's right, yeah. Or something like that.
I'm sorry. My
It's a symptom. It's always a symptom of something else.
Indicator. It's an indicator.
I think we have time for one more question.
I'm sorry.
I'm curious, Pema, when you felt yourself closing down when Father Greg mentioned the word God, and you were telling yourself to work with it. What exactly were you doing to work with it?
Well, I kept listening, and I kept simultaneously feeling any part of me that was closing, and just breathe and kind of open. And I stayed away from any storyline, about it. I just dealt with the fact that it was making me uncomfortable. So it's the same thing. It's a symptom. Like, I wonder what that's about. I guess that was kind of, the idea. I wonder what that's about. I wonder what that's about. Why am I getting so about this, I wonder what that's about. I'll probably be asking myself that all week, but do you see what I'm saying? It's, first of all, not getting caught in a storyline, to stay with the kind of raw material of what I was feeling, and wondering what's that about, but not going off on not coming to some kind of conclusion, but just staying curious, I guess you could say, staying curious and in touch with what I was feeling, and always opting on opening to the whole thing rather than closing down around it. So not getting stuck in my view. On the other hand, not trying to make it go away either.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you. So, I think that's it. On that note, I guess, thank you all for being here and staying curious and staying compassionate and sharing this experience with these two amazing people.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.